For the past few years, the beatings and killings of unarmed black men and women by police officers have shocked our nation. And with the 2016 presidential election fast approaching, racial tensions and police brutality will certainly prove to be hot-button election issues. But how significant is the contribution of police brutality to the racial polarization we find ourselves facing today? Just as important as it was 50 years ago. But that was a different era, you might say. Black Panthers, civil disobedience, Jim Crow laws, Martin Luther King Jr., the Civil Rights Movement, and El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, better known as Malcolm X. If he was still with us today, he might disagree that much has changed. Malcolm grew up in a racially polarized era. His father was an outspoken supporter of black nationalist leader Marcus Garvey and was a local leader of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Early in his childhood, Malcolm's family received many death threats from white supremacist organizations such as the KKK. Because of these death threats, his family had to move multiple times. Their Michigan home was burned to the ground, and a few years later, his father was found dead. Police declared his death an accident, but rumors circulated that white supremacists were responsible. Soon thereafter, Malcolm's mother suffered a mental breakdown. As a consequence, Malcolm floated between many foster homes, and as a young adult, he was involved in petty crimes. Eventually, he was arrested for burglary and sentenced to 10 years in prison. It was in prison that Malcolm chose to educate himself and consume as many books as he could. Through influence from his siblings, he embraced the teachings of the Nation of Islam, including the nation's belief that white people were devils and black people were the original people of the world. After Malcolm left prison, he rose through the ranks of the Nation of Islam and became their national spokesman. He was soon considered the second most powerful man in the Nation of Islam after Elijah Muhammad.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad has stopped us from stealing, and we did steal. He stopped us from gambling, he stopped us from cheating, and he stopped us from lying.
His ability to communicate his ideas and influence people even had journalists mesmerized. But Malcolm's life took a major turn in 1964 when he reconsidered his beliefs and trust in Elijah Muhammad, leaving the Nation of Islam and embracing mainstream Islam. He went on the pilgrimage to Mecca, where he encountered, as he put it, quote, Muslims of all colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans. It was at this juncture in his life that Malcolm began to view Islam as the solution to the myriad racial problems he'd been fighting against for much of his adult life.
If the religion of Islam could eliminate racism from among the societies that exist in Africa, Asia, Europe, and Arabia, then it would do well for the American white man to expose himself to get to a better understanding of the religion of Islam, and perhaps it can remove some of the racism, which is like a cancer that is destroying the American society today.
And this is what I had to become aware of on my pilgrimage to Mecca. I could see then that there are many white people in this country who will side with the Negro in whatever he has to do to protect himself.
But that's a considerable change of opinion in Malcolm X.
No, today I'm speaking for myself. Formerly I spoke for Elijah Muhammad. And everything I said was, Elijah Muhammad teaches us thus and so. I'm speaking now from what I think, from what I have seen, from what I have analyzed, and the conclusions that I have reached.
He came back to the U.S. with a more grounded understanding of race and civil rights. However, it wasn't too long before he was assassinated. After his assassination, the media portrayed Malcolm as a violent individual who should be shunned. Most school history textbooks overlook the vital role he played in the black liberation and civil rights movement during the 1960s. As a result, much of the focus of Black History Month tends to be around figures such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. But the historical reality is much more nuanced. In fact, Dr. King himself sent a telegram to Malcolm's widow, Betty Shabazz, right after his assassination, in which he stated, quote, I always had a deep affection for Malcolm and felt that he had a great ability to put his finger on the existence and the root of the problem. Dr. King continued, quote, he was an eloquent spokesman for his point of view, and no one can honestly doubt that Malcolm had a great concern for the problems we face as a race.
The problem of the black people in America is inseparable from the problem of oppressed people all over the world. And until the leaders of black America realize that our problem is inseparable from the entire international problem, we will be considered a minority, will be considered an underdog, and will be begging for the things that we should have had when we were born.
The genius of Malcolm was in his ability to revolutionize the struggle for civil rights by attacking the system rather than individual elements within the system, and his prescient ideas are still as relevant now as they were during the 1960s. He addressed the rising incarceration rates of blacks, a serious problem that persists to this day. African Americans are incarcerated at nearly 6 times the rate of whites, accounting for 1 million of the 2.4 million incarcerated. The Rand Corporation study found that convicted African Americans were more likely than whites to go to prison, and with sentences that were longer. An investigation by the American Civil Liberties Union also found that black people in Minneapolis are 8.7 times more likely to be arrested for low-level offenses than white people. Malcolm X had plenty to say about these trends 50 years ago.
An example, Commissioner Murphy. Almost every statement that Commissioner Murphy makes would give you the impression that he's encouraging the police, rank-and-file policemen, that to take whatever method or measure is necessary to hold the Negroes in check. He feeds the type of statistics to the white public to make them think that Harlem is a complete criminal area, that everyone is prone toward violence. This gives the police the impression that they can then go and brutalize the Negroes or suppress the Negroes or even frighten the Negroes. Whenever something happens, 20 police cars converge on one area. This doesn't frighten Negroes. So it means that someone is either misinforming Commissioner Murphy and making him use tactics this year that he would not use 4 years ago, or that the former policeman Kennedy would not use. And this force that is so visible in the Harlem community creates a spirit of resentment in every Negro. They think they're living in a police state, and they become hostile toward the policeman. They think that the policeman is there to be against them rather than to protect them.
50 years later, we're still witnessing what Malcolm referred to as brutal methods. A study by The Guardian found that young black men were 9 times more likely than other Americans to be killed by police officers in 2015, and 1 in every 65 deaths of a young African American man in America was at the hands of the police. Every year we come upon the anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X on February 21st, 1965. Despite facing numerous death threats, Malcolm was not afraid to confront challenges head-on with his fearlessness and principled stances on the issues. Eventually, that cost him his life. But the police brutality and racial polarization he dealt with continued to be just as divisive to our country as they were 50 years ago. The question begs itself: what have we as a nation learned from Malcolm's legacy as we continue our struggle against racism and police brutality?